maybe let's start off with a bit of reflection from you. You have been CEO for almost a year now, but clearly that was maybe the nicest introduction I think we have ever heard on our stage. Thank you, Monique. Great to get that personal touch. But when you think back at your long history of time with BC Hydro, 20 years or so in operations, what has that brought to you in your new role as CEO?
Well, I think for any CEO, I really believe you need to have a deep appreciation for what it takes to run a distributed linear system like this. I mean, it literally, what is it, a province, 1 million square kilometers, and literally we have tens of thousands of kilometers of, first of all, infrastructure to run, but also impact to communities, to people. Like, we are literally in people's backyards. And, when you're in operations, actually anywhere in our company, working in any teams, I mean, you really get face-to-face with the customers in the most personal sense, in the sense that, like I said, our infrastructure is right in the communities. And I think, not only knowing sort of the inner workings of how this magic happens when you flip on the light switch, I feel a lot of gratitude to having that sort of understanding and context. But again, I think the key is knowing just how much you need a service orientation in your workforce and your people in order to be successful and to deliver what British Columbians expect of us.
And delivery going to be very important, especially I think about what this summer is shaping up to be by all accounts, very hot, dry summer. And we had a very unusually dry winter when it came to snow. So the snowpack is maybe not melting as much. And over the last several years, hydro has been in a situation where it's had to import more power than export. What are you forecasting for the summer ahead?
Yeah, it's been 3 or 4 years of drought, and I really feel for the areas that are still under sort of a drought. BC Hydro's in a very different situation this year. It's quite extraordinary. We had a very good snowpack, very good precipitation levels in the areas where we have our big reservoirs. So with the Peace system and the Columbia system. So our reservoirs are in very good shape. We are going to be, our water forecast for this coming year is that we're going to be a net exporter, which is extraordinary. You wouldn't know that just from sort of reading the weather reports. And, maybe I'll just sort of elaborate a little bit on that import-export, because, there were some tough years in there in terms of drought. We had 1 year with very large imports, but the other years were actually within sort of our normal variance that we planned for in terms of level of importing. I just always want to stress, imports and exports, super important for our system, for optimizing those assets. We have these great reservoirs. We can store water for, 3 years. We can import, and we import even in years where we're exporting, because we can buy that cheap market energy, store it in the reservoir, release it when we need it. And I don't know if people know this, but trade income from imports and exports keeps rates 17% lower than what we'd otherwise pay. So, I always do want to assure people we've got this covered. Import levels were high, but we've got a really robust and resilient system. And the one example I always use is that we had that Arctic outflow a couple of years. We had that really high, low levels of low temperatures in the north. And this was before Site C. We were in the middle of a drought. I remember, because I was still in operations, we had every unit in the province spinning for reserves and for powering that load. And we even were able to provide some power to Alberta and help them because they were having an energy emergency. So very resilient system, and it's a good example.
So a good point. You speak about low rates and at the same time very clearly outlining a lot of expansion. And so the question might be, how are you able to keep rates low but spend tens of billions of dollars that's required to grow the needs for the province? Are you not just deferring that recovery cost to future generations then?
Yeah, so definitely when you're in a growth period, you've always got to, like you said, make sure you're not deferring costs. We have a regulator that keeps us very in line on that, making sure that we're not using the deferral accounts in ways that weren't intended. What I would say to that, yeah, the build is big and the dollars are big, but we are always focused on affordability. It's great to start with low rates, and we intend to keep this jurisdiction as a low-rate jurisdiction, still keep it with some of the lowest rates in North America. And how we're going to manage this is, one, that's why you saw me focus so much on conservation. It is still the best investment, the lowest cost energy source. And so, again, prudent investments like that. From a capital build side, the numbers are huge. What's very good about the BC Hydro system is our assets have lives of 50 to 100 years. So big capital plan, but we get to depreciate those over very long assets life cycles. That lessens impact on rates. And then finally, I would say, I'm really excited about this federal electricity strategy. I really hope we get some federal support for the infrastructure. You saw things in that new federal energy strategy around investing in transmission lines within provinces. Certainly the Canadian Infrastructure Bank has provided a lot of low-cost financing. So, we're going to use all of those mechanisms available to us to keep the rate pressures down.
Well, let's dive into the federal strategy since the Prime Minister was here last week. I see Mayor Ken Sim is in Ottawa as we speak. The Western Premiers are meeting as well. So what kind of work is BC Hydro doing to leverage those dollars federally? Yeah,
so I think we're in an excellent position in BC. We're kind of out of the gate early. We're a front runner in all this. We have, I think, a strategy that's lines up perfectly with this. So you saw the strategy talk about things like big transmission builds, First Nations partnerships. I mean, we have a long history of First Nations partnerships, but we do have them on the North Coast transmission line right now. You see the high equity position in our power calls and the wind and solar projects coming online. So, we're all in on that. The financing, we already have a relationship with the Major Projects Office, and you heard Prime Minister Carney talk about the fact that 40% of the nation-building projects are in BC. We're powering those projects, so of course we are working with the federal government through the Major Projects Office around how they can help us with that big infrastructure.
Have there been discussions with any kind of cooperation agreements with Alberta, for example?
Yeah, the Alberta, so interties obviously, and,
yes.
and I mean, I'll be clear, our work with Alberta right now is to restore the existing intertie and maximize that intertie. We have teams and working with Alberta in terms of potential interties, but and we are all in on that strategy. That is work that's ongoing between the governments right now too.
I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about Site C, the John Horgan Dam now as it's called. I mean, there were some lessons learned, I think a report called Lessons Learned. I mean, when you look at some of these big builds and what is required down the road for British Columbia, what would you say are some of the biggest lessons when it comes to building big in British Columbia?
Yeah, I mean, that report that we submitted to the BCUC, we put a lot of thought into it, and the biggest thing is, like you said, you got to get those lessons learned back into your practices. If they don't get embedded in your practices, your project management practices, they'll just be good ideas that you never implemented. So a lot of it was around how you assess risk and how you build risk into your estimates, and being really transparent on that. You would have seen quite a bit on the low probability, high impact risks, and how you make sure your board and your regulator understands the upside of those risks. There was lots of lessons on standing up your teams early and making sure, from a contract management perspective, you embed the teams early in procurement. We're getting all of those into our new practices.
I'm going to go to some of the Slido questions. This is interesting because I'm particularly looking at the piece there, the word there on nuclear. So when you're considering these large builds, and I'm going to change the question a little bit, and you're talking about that mix of supply and how important that is nuclear ever part of that solution for British Columbia? Knowing that, we've got a ban moratorium in British Columbia, I mean, do you see that maybe things are shifting, as they are for lots of countries around the world?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, policies can be changed. I don't ever like to say, well, the policy isn't and we can't do it. I would just say on that, I think we have lots of other alternatives before we get into nuclear. Like, I don't think this is a jurisdiction that needs to be leading edge in that. That being said, we will stay very tied to that industry to learn what's going on. I mean, you know, the costs, I'm really interested to see how the costs shake out, especially on the small modular. So I just don't feel like we need to expose BC Hydro ratepayers to sort of that leading edge option. Right now, we've got other options that we could pull that are cheaper, lower cost. And so, yeah, right now we have no plans on nuclear. We don't have a team stood up on it, but we do have people that are obviously embedding themselves in learning from other jurisdictions.
I mean, certainly when I talk to my son and his friends who are in their 20s, I mean, they believe the future is all about nuclear, and there is lots of work that is being done in other jurisdictions around the world.
Yeah, no, it's really important we stay current from it. Philosophically, I'm not against it. I'm just, from a sort of fiduciary responsibility to BC Hydro, I'm just not ready to go there yet.
Appreciate that you talked about PowerSmart 2.0, and maybe you could dive a little deeper into what the potential benefits would be, mostly for those commercial and industrial customers. I think residential we can understand, and I really appreciated the example you had around Science World, which was very impactful. But for maybe some of the smaller and medium businesses, because there's so many of them in British Columbia?
Sure. So, I mean, at the point of this program launching it is not to just, say it's $1 billion more and then make it complicated for people to access funding, because we know that complexity, not making it easy, means people have got other things they need to do and they just won't opt in. So this plan really gives, I think, more flexibility, kind of less rigid program requirements for businesses to find their spot. And like I said, the rebates are going up. There's some really interesting stuff on the demand side management side where, we're trying to get loads off peak periods, so we don't have to build more lines, distribution in particular. And I think if they connect, if businesses want to connect with any of our teams or through our website, somebody's going to reach out to you, because we are all in on this. And I think there's something for everybody here, but I think there's also the potential for these businesses to really see real savings. And I mean, everything, like I said, from moving off peaks, encourage you to get paid for doing that, to some very hefty rebates available.
Now, thinking about the demand side for BC Hydro in the coming years, and one of the things I was thinking about when I was preparing to sit down and talk to you is the move to push to so many of these AI data centers and the electrification of vehicles. And as I'm looking at this acceleration of AI, and we could talk about that forever, because there's a lot of questions and comments I have about that. But given that acceleration, how does that go into the future planning for BC Hydro?
Yeah, I mean, it's planning right now is really challenging. If you think you're going to get your forecast right, you are not a professional forecaster, because we saw 10 years of flat loads, and then we see this change. And AI was one of those, and there we really hit kind of almost a policy question, which is they come on so fast. You could really use up a lot of this low-cost heritage energy we're so proud of on one industry. And that doesn't seem like a prudent and fair way to manage sort of the economic development of the whole province. So, BC Hydro doesn't have a position against AI data centers. It's the pacing question. And so I think the launch we did in January of the energy allocation framework, where we have basically AI and data centers, you can bid into a queue position. And we've got up to 400 megawatts saved for AI and data centers over the next 2 years. And when they bid in, they have to bid in and show how these are good for BC. I think we all feel every jurisdiction has to do their part for the data sovereignty piece. But what are you going to do for BC in terms of jobs, environmental footprint? And we're also asking them to bid in higher than tariff rate. So they will pay more than industrial or commercial, standard tariffs that others pay. I think that's fair. They seem to be an industry that can do that, so.
Well, and I think British Columbia has some additional complexities as it comes to these AI data centers around seismic stability as well. So we wouldn't necessarily be like other states in the US that are building so many of them.
Yeah, the hyperscaler thing that, interesting, we'll see how this auction plays out. But, that was a concern. I mean, who wouldn't want low-cost clean energy, right? And you can say you could power your data center with that. So we were quite concerned around the scale of some of these and just how fast they come online.
Yeah. That's the question right there. Okay, so we covered that one, but there was a question there that about around consultation. It's that second question down. So around some industrial tariff workshops and then a filing at BCUC, rejecting some of these industry recommendations. So how do you square that then around consultation?
Yeah, well, I'd like to understand that one a little bit more. It says we rejected nearly every industry recommendation. I don't feel like I could comment on that in the sense that I'd really want to understand. That's quite a big statement. I know on some of our tariffs like TS6, we've been really listening to customers around what is prohibitive in terms of their ability of customers to invest in that level. And we don't want our policies to get in the way of investment in mines and big industry. So we've worked really hard to actually change some of the industrial tariffs on that and to open that up. So I'll be interested to delve a bit more into this. But it is something that's in front of the work BCUC right now. So there is an opportunity for everybody to get their voice heard, and that's why I guess the regulator will be managing that process.
I'm going to jump down a couple. A question about it's just there around wind. So talking about the comparison between Alberta and then why BC Industries, or the perception is that BC Industries are paying more. Some of these are super technical, and so I thank you all in the audience for this, but I'm not at that level, and I'm hoping that Charlotte, you might have more insight into some of these that I do.
So why this one, BC Hydro's call locked wind in at $74?
And while Alberta clears 35 to 50.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, we run a competitive call, and we take the bids, and then we have to assess how those compare against other alternatives. And so these come in. I mean, they came in 40% lower that first call than the 2010 call. Clean energy call. So prices have been coming down. The Alberta 35 to 50, I think the difference there probably is the sum of many parts. And our, like at $74, I mean, our wind resources are pretty good here. They're not world class in some areas, but I think the main probably is probably a series of policy, permitting, terrain, all of those things, and probably maybe the scale as well. And then our second call, we did increase the maximum size in order to get the economies of scale piece. I have to follow up on that too. And that might be an old number, 35 to 50. I'm kind of digesting in the moment, but I think those numbers are going up in Alberta too.
You talked about the substation work that's being done in and around Greater Vancouver. Why is that so important to do that, and what will the benefit be when the work is complete?
The substation work, yeah. So really important. I mean, as you talked about EVs, local commercial companies, that growth that we're seeing at the local level, getting the power to the homes, that's where we're hitting our limits on substations. And so, I mean, the work in downtown is twofold. It's to increase the capacity of what we can deliver there, but it's also to increase the reliability. And so these new substation builds, particularly for Vancouver and for other areas like Langley and Surrey, they also build a better loop, right? So that we can serve communities from multiple sources. It gives us more flexibility in terms of if we have an issue in certain areas, we can serve off different infrastructure. But this is a big build out of substations. it's not a sort of like little incremental thing, and that's why we highlight it in our capital plan.
Maybe we'll end with some questions there, which is the last one, is that especially because you've been at BC Hydro for a long time, and BC Hydro is seen as this clean energy superpower, yet there seems to be still some delays, whether it's coming around regulatory matters. You've been there a long time. Mm-hmm. So in the 2 decades that you've been there, and now is in your first year as CEO, there is a perception, at least from the federal perspective, that things are starting to move more quickly. And British Columbia, there is maybe a mixed perception about that. But what are you seeing from your perspective? Are we actually moving things more quickly and really understanding the urgency, especially around energy resiliency and energy security?
Yeah, I can honestly say I'm starting to see it. I mean, I think there's been real efforts at the BC provincial level to try and change permitting. You saw that move to the energy regulator and exempting some of the wind projects from EAs, and I think those are big moves, right? And they're emblematic. They're trying to send a signal, right? That we are trying to move things faster. I mentioned it a bit up during my speech. I think we're all trying to figure out ways to spend less time on small risks and more time on the bigger risks, right? And get rid of some of the process and the slow decision making, I called it. And we're working, like I said, as a company on that. But I see a real desire across our partners, across government, and internally to do that. And it's really giving, it sounds strange, the license for people to make mistakes in that world, right? Because you get a lot of flack for making a mistake, and what we're trying to enable people is the missed opportunity from going slow is actually a mistake. That's got bigger implications sometimes, and I would say, yeah, it's painful to sort of pull apart bureaucracies and untangle really complex processes that have been built up year over year across governments and jurisdictions and agencies and crown corporations. But I see a tremendous desire to do that.
That is very optimistic. Last question, we'll end where we started. So you've been in the role almost a year. What has been your biggest surprise in being CEO?
I would say I am, and I think this is a good thing, I am in awe of the enormity of the task in front of us. When you get into certain roles, your perch allows you to see more of what's going on and the interconnectivity of that. And you realize how much has to work together in order to get the outcomes everybody's looking for. And I think that, we talk about this moment in time and this real push on economic development and trade resiliency and energy resiliency. And we really just can't keep pushing hard enough. We're gonna have to have grit to get the outcomes we're looking for, and a push and a kind of relentless I would say pursuit of building things and like I said, a bit of a business risk reduction kind of mentality. And I just think that's, for me, it is a sort of I appreciate the enormity of the task in front of us. And then I also feel, like I said, optimistic. I see so much talent able to solve these problems or move this big agenda. So I think that's probably the biggest realization. I think this machine can work, and I think we can see a lot of change in the next 5 years.
Perhaps time for us to be a bit more un-Canadian and to get out of our own way and get things done.
Yeah,
Charlotte, thank you.
Thank you
very much. Appreciate it.
All right.